man's name was Thomas, and he had always been fascinated by the dark arts of manipulation and control. He had stumbled upon the ancient texts of hypnosis during his midlife crisis, seeking a new thrill to replace the mundane existence he had been leading. His eyes devoured the ancient scriptures, his mind absorbing the arcane knowledge that promised to grant him power over others. After months of solitary study, he had mastered the craft, his gaze becoming a weapon capable of bending the will of anyone who dared to meet it. Thomas's life took a sinister turn as he began to use his newfound abilities in his everyday encounters. His insatiable appetite for power grew stronger with each successful conquest. He would spot his prey, typically a beautiful, unsuspecting woman, and approach her with a charming smile and a casual greeting. His eyes would lock onto hers, and within moments, she would be under his spell. He led these enchanted females through a series of suggestions, convincing them to perform his darkest desires, and then, with a simple snap of his fingers, they would return to their lives, remembering nothing of the ordeal. The thrill of manipulation became an addiction for Thomas. Each encounter grew more daring and depraved, pushing the boundaries of what he believed was possible. He reveled in the power he wielded over his victims, feeling like a god as they danced to his silent commands. His confidence grew to the point where he thought he was untouchable. One fateful evening, Thomas set his sights on a young woman named Lila. She was a painter with a fiery spirit and an ethereal beauty that drew him in like a moth to a flame. He watched her from afar at a local gallery opening, her vibrant laughter and the way her eyes sparkled as she discussed her art with admirers. He knew he had to have her. Thomas waited for the perfect opportunity, and when the crowd thinned, he approached her. He began his hypnotic routine, his eyes boring into hers, as he whispered sweet nothings and planted his twisted suggestions. But unlike the others, Lila seemed to resist. Her pupils dilated, and she looked into his eyes with a mix of curiosity and fear. Undeterred, Thomas increased the intensity of his gaze. His voice grew softer, more insistent as he wove his web of control around her. Lila swayed slightly, her eyelids fluttering as she fought against the siren call of his hypnosis. Sensing her struggle, Thomas grew more aggressive in his mental assault, his eyes burning with a malevolent light. Finally, she succumbed. Lila's body went slack, and she became putty in his hands. He led her out of the gallery and into the dark alley behind it, his heart racing with excitement. This was going to be his masterpiece, the pinnacle of his dark talents. Once they were alone, Thomas allowed his true self to emerge. He whispered lewd commands into her ear, and she obeyed without protest, stripping off her clothing and offering herself to him. He reveled in her subservience, his hands exploring her body with a possessive hunger that bordered on madness. But as he reached the zenith of his depravity, something within Lila snapped. Her eyes, once glazed over with the haze of hypnosis, now burned with a fierce, almost primal anger. Thomas felt a sudden surge of energy flowing through her, and before he could react, she had torn herself free from his grip. She stepped back, breathing heavily, her body trembling with a mix of fear and rage. He watched in horror as she raised her hand, a glowing ember of rebellion in her palm. With a scream that echoed through the alley, Lila threw the ember at him, and it grew into a raging inferno that engulfed Thomas. He staggered back, his clothes catching fire as the flames consumed him. His mind raced with panic, unable to believe that his power had failed him. As the fire devoured him, he realized that he had underestimated the depths of her will. Her hand reached out, and a spark of fire danced at her fingertips. Thomas felt the heat, the pain, and the overwhelming terror of his impending doom. The fire grew, wrapping around him like a lover's embrace, searing his flesh and consuming his will.